Okay, we're back live again. Actually having a live session this time instead of a video session. So you're all familiar with Jon Egeler, President and CEO of Mission Safety International. And we're just looking forward to the update. We get an update every year, and it's one of those that we really want to hear because it tells us how we're doing and how we can do better in the area of safety. So Jon, please share with us.
Yeah, good afternoon for everyone, at least those of us on the East Coast. It's good to be here and see all of you. I'd like to start off today's session. Oh, first of all, if you see waves and a beach behind me, no, that's not where I am. It's wishful thinking, although in about 3 or 4 days, I hope to be someplace like that, Lord willing. But I'd like to start off with a new promotional video that MSI just had completed a couple of days ago. So you'll be the first public audience to see it, but let's get that started right now.
Mission Safety International's purpose is to enhance safety and effectiveness in missionary aviation for the glory of God.
Aviation, like any life and death industry, you're only a second away from a split-second decision. That was the wrong one. And so we come alongside missions that are involved in aviation ministry, and we're like safety consultants to them. So we will come in and evaluate the program. Our job is never done.
Just like an auditing team would look at your financial books, we do it on a safety perspective and just give them a recommendation and a good package of tools that they can use to make their operations better and ultimately more successful.
Our goal simply is to help these professionals have a safer organization and for them to be able to serve the people that they are out there ministering to in the United States and around the world.
Our job as a church is to reach the world with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And as an aviation organization, we're tasked with doing that in areas that have no access except by air. And so we find ourselves in some of the harshest and most demanding parts of the world.
As things come up on the field, your emotions get a hold of you. And so in those times, it's hard to think about the safety side of things because your heart is involved.
And the temptation when you're flying in those circumstances is to really get the job done. We're there for a purpose. God wants us there to fly these people and deliver the goods and do ministry day after day, trying to get the job done. But if you crash at the end of the day, you've lost a whole lifetime of ministry because of it.
Well, MSI was started by Joe Hopkins back in the early 1980s. He was really bothered by the fact that so many people were dying in aircraft accidents.
He had been on the mission field. He knew what it felt like to be in that experience and know the dynamics of the pressures and the environment and that sort of thing. So Joe felt led of God to start Mission Safety International, just to come alongside these folks and help them in the best way he knew how.
Within an organization, it's very easy to become blinded, to become very mission focused and not see some of the things, whether it's physical safety or organizational safety or even maintaining the mission of the organization. Sometimes those things can be lost in the passion of the work that you do. And so I watched as NSI came in and they applied a magnifying lens to every aspect of the ministry and giving us valuable corrective advice.
Nobody comes to us because they have to. They come to us because they want to. And that helps set up a really unique relationship. We're coming as friends. We're not coming as somebody that's gonna, inspect them and shut them down or something like that.
I was pleasantly surprised with the idea that this was a friend coming alongside to give me some good advice. And it ended up being very enjoyable, not only in our quest for safety and to improve our safety, but on a spiritual level too.
We can be that voice and that group of gentle but wise, accountable counsel when things aren't going right in the organization.
We want to put those two things together, safety and effectiveness. And when you do that, then you have a successful aviation organization.
There's lives of people at stake in these aircraft. And to do anything but operate them at the most safe level would be a disservice.
So when we see people making these flights and delivering the goods and getting people to the hospital and helping to save people both physically and spiritually, it's just a fulfilling thing. Watching the accident rate, the fatality rate come down year after year in missionary aviation, yeah, it's as good as it gets.
Just as a wife and mother, it just puts my heart and mind at ease, knowing that things like that are in place and that we have a whole team and organization that values the safety culture.
One of the things that really hits home is when a spouse comes to you and says, thank you for the work you do, keeping my husband or my wife safe and making sure they come home to me every night. That means a lot.
Okay. Well, it's really good to be here. Let's switch over to our PowerPoint. I'm going to be doing something just a little bit different today. It is somewhat of an update, but not quite like we've done in some of the other sessions before. What I want to talk about today is it's okay not to be perfect. And somebody said, well, really, is that what you want to talk about? Anyway, it's about human frailty and safety. And so as I've gotten a little older here, going up on my 60th birthday, 41 years in aviation, you tend to get a little bit reflective and think about, what is it I've learned? What can I share with people that, really sticks in my mind? And one thing is that trends and cycles seem to define us as human beings. It seems that we tend to, life goes in these cycles or trends. We've seen, everything from fashion that comes back around, the skinny ties or the bell-bottom blue jeans or whatever that, were around before. People think they're brand new, but they're not. People tend to be the same. And as Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. And that's not any different in the world of missionary aviation. As we look at some of the accidents and incidents and things going on, it seems that there's a few areas that had made good improvement but are seeming to come back. And so thinking about that and why that is and what all goes into that kind of prompted the idea of this presentation today. Because, we want to know why is this? What can we do about it? And so can we do something about it is the big question, of course. So one of the things going on is that there is a new generation taking over, and this is nothing new. We've always had new people coming in to, if you want to call missionary aviation an industry, but there's always going to be people coming and going, older people retiring, newer people coming on. But more than that, there's been really a larger turnover perhaps than we've seen in quite some time. And some of the newer generation might not be as conservative as some of the olders. And again, this is kind of a human thing. You find that the younger you are, maybe you're just willing to take a little more risk than somebody who's a little older. Everything from climbing a ladder or riding a motorbike really fast or stuff like that. But and to their defense, the younger generation has a lot better equipment, real cool tools that, some of the older people never saw, or if they did, it was toward the tail end of their career. GPS, maps, weather, prediction around the world almost. It's getting not as good as it should be, but it's getting a whole lot better. The picture there, the Kodiak, and so there is a lot going for things right now. And it can lead to a little bit of invulnerability and a feeling that, it's really a tendency for people like when they're younger to just feel like they're bulletproof, it can't happen to them or whatever. And that's true for all of us, really. Been a lot of studies that talk about that. And so, however, that might be partly because you haven't had as many friends lost. And I tell you, there's nothing that affects you probably more deeply than to have a personal friend or a loved one or somebody you knew well die in an aircraft accident, for you to rethink your whole attitude toward risk and risk management and that kind of thing. And trust me, it's not something you want to go through. And then just in general, life experience, and whether you've experienced failure or have you been successful your whole life, everything you've tried has gone well, can really deeply impact your view of risk and how much margin you leave yourself and that kind of thing. And the older you get, the more life experience you have, the more you've seen people fail or consequences kick in, you tend to back off a little bit, become more conservative. And quite frankly, a lot of times people just don't see all the dangers that are there. They're just not aware. Maybe they're just not observant, or maybe they're not looking for them, or a lot of times you don't know what you don't know. I mean, it's one of those conundrums of human condition. And also, there's that sense of not fully appreciating our own limitations as human beings. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but our tendency as human beings is to be optimists and to overestimate our abilities. And that's not always a bad thing, but in some things it is a bad thing. And we'll talk about that some more. But we do have real limitations in this human condition that we are, and we need to recognize that. But, however, weather and the environment are the same. Things really haven't changed much in those areas. So, we may have cool tools, but we still have challenges. And many of the challenges are the same as they've always been. And so human beings are also the same. We may have a lot that we've learned through research and development and developed a lot of different things, but human beings still have certain things about them that no amount of machine learning or computers or anything else is going to make up for. Well, here's some relevant human characteristics let's talk about. First of all is hope or optimism. Now, as I mentioned before, we'll talk about this. I'll list them here: pride in our work, and then identity or value tied to what we do. So let's talk about that hope optimism thing. That's, as I said before, it's actually quite a good thing when it comes to how we live our lives here on Earth. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty here on Earth. I've often told people, I said, God didn't give us omniscience, because if he did, we'd just stay in bed with the covers pulled up, because we'd be afraid of what was coming down the road. We don't really relish some of the challenges and pain and things that are coming our way. And I think in many ways, God has given us hope and optimism to help us be able to manage this world and always be thinking that, tomorrow is a better day. And there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel, and it can't be so bad. And there's a dawn coming after the darkness, all of these phrases we have that express that. But that hope or optimism isn't always so good when we're trying to assess life and death risks, because reality is often very harsh, and hope isn't going to necessarily get us over that hump. It's not always a good tool to use when you're trying to assess risk. We all tend to overestimate our abilities. You've all heard of this. 90% of pilots see themselves as above average. And that's not just pilots. That's doctors. That's all kinds of people. Every person tends to overestimate their abilities. That's just the way we're wired, and it's good. Confidence can be a good thing, or we never try anything new. But in some areas, it can also be a pitfall for us. And you've heard the phrase, sure, I can do that. That can't be that too hard. Anybody could do that, and it's just illustrative of our tendency to overestimate our abilities. We all tend to underestimate the risk. This goes all the way back, I think, to the Garden of Eden, and the serpent speaking to Eve and saying, oh, God didn't really mean you die. You can really taste this fruit. He's just trying to, keep you from, being like him, and so our tendency is to always think of, well, it can't be that bad, and, the old phrase, well, it won't happen to me, and it's a piece of cake, or, the chances of that happening are nil. There's no way that would happen. That's, you'd be more likely to, struck by lightning 3 times than for that to happen, or something like that. Then another aspect here let's look at is pride in our work. Now, again, there's a real positive side of this, I think. I do believe that this is a little bit of how we're wired as a reflection of God's creative character. At the end of creation, it says that God, each and every day, at the end of each day, he's looked at his work and said, that's good, I like it. My own paraphrase, of course. But I think we're the same way. We like to do a good job and be able to look at it afterwards and say, yeah, I like that. I feel good about it. And I think that's good. That is part of our reflection of God's character in us. Very positive thing. It serves to motivate us toward excellence. We tend to want to do better and better. We tend to strive for excellence, and I think that's a good thing. One of the points that Tony Kern makes in many of his talks and his books is that in order to achieve excellence, we need to strive for perfection. And so I'm not undermining that with this talk. I just want to make that clear. We're talking about something a little different here, but we do want to strive for perfection and precision and doing an excellent work. I don't want to negate that at all. But it can be dangerous when we define success as getting there instead of providing safe transportation. Let's pause and think about that a little bit. If you're running an aviation service somewhere, and every organization we go and visit, has a phrase, something to the effect of providing safe and economical transportation. And I don't think it's an accident that they put that safe in there, because we could just provide economical transportation and there might be bodies all over. But people expect safe. They expect to arrive there safely. They don't expect to get hurt or injured or killed riding in an aircraft. And that's a non-negotiable in all of aviation. And we need to remember our definition of success. What is success? Is it just, moving these people from point A to point B, or is success actually ensuring their safety in getting them there? And if that is our definition, it might change a little bit of how we go about that. And the question is, taking off and having to return or divert without reaching the original planned destination really a failure? And stop and think about that. Now, of course, all of you would tend to say, oh, of course not. But I have had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and when you really dig deep and examine deeply, sometimes taking off and flying for half an hour and coming back and landing is seen as a failure. Maybe even just at a emotional subsurface level. and it doesn't just have to be the pilot. You know, I can remember an incident where a pilot had to come back due to weather and reported back into the booking department, and the schedulers like, oh man, now we got to redo the whole schedule, and of course that was not really a way to motivate that pilot to make that same decision again, even though it was probably the right decision. So all of us need to think about that. Is if you're a mechanic working on an aircraft, is getting the job done and out the door on Friday, like you told the maintenance scheduler it would be done. Is that success, or is getting the job done safely the success, even if it's on Saturday? So those are good questions to think through and really examine in your own heart where you are on that. All right, let's look at the area of identity or value tied to what we do. What do I mean by that? Well, what's the second? It is related to the pride in the work, but it's a little different. What's the second question everybody asks when you meet somebody new? It's, hi, what's your name? The first question. And the second one is, what do you do? Something about us as human beings is we tend to identify ourselves by what we do. It provides us significance, context. I think, again, in our DNA is a need to work, to contribute to society in some way. I think that's the way God has wired us. You remember back in the Garden of Eden again, Adam and Eve had work to do long before sin entered the picture. And I think that's the way God has created. We find value and meaning in our work. But it can have a downside, and that's if we find value and meaning only in our work, that can lead to problems. But this value does help us stay focused and productive. So there's some real good to it. But it can be harmful if we define our self-worth only through success, again, what we define as success. Here's a question for you. Is failure bad? Is failure bad? Think about that for a minute. Now, most of you will say, well, of course it's bad. We don't want to fail. None of us want to fail. But I can also tell you that most people that have really succeeded in a big way have gone through failure many times. A really good example in recent news is the SpaceX program. SpaceX has been building rockets now for a very short amount of time, a millisecond in terms of some of the other government-sponsored agencies, and yet they've made tremendous progress. And one of the ways they're doing that is a very different approach, in the sense that they're willing to launch a rocket and have it blow up and still see that as success, because they're able to learn all of the things, all the information they gather is recorded and analyzed afterward. And maybe one thing went wrong, but 10,000 things went right, and they learned from those 10,000 things right as well as the one thing that went wrong. And Elon Musk, I think, would say, no, failure isn't bad. It's a good thing. We learn from it. It's how we rapidly develop. And if we're really, really honest with ourselves, failure is often used by God to teach us very valuable lessons in our life. And so we need to be careful about our attitude toward failure and what we see as failure. When we start out with a plan or an idea and it doesn't work out that way, but has to change or fit reality, is that really failure? Again, something to think about. Just because our estimation of how the plan would go, or how the schedule is, or what we think is going to happen doesn't work out, is that failure? I think in many cases it's not. And so we have to be careful about that. So let's talk about some ways that we can actually get the job done despite the fact that we are very frail and imperfect human beings. How can we do that? Well, one of the things we want to talk about today is just have a plan B for unsuccess. We won't call it failure. But just, I know you've heard it before. It's like, yeah, we should always have alternatives. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Just plan that things aren't necessarily going to work out perfectly as we anticipated the first time around. Put it right into the plan. The expectations are laid. Yeah, okay, this is plan A, but here's a plan B and here's a plan C or whatever. Unfortunately, in our world and some of our tools that we've used, I'm Safe and others, it's always just like a go, no go. You know, go on this flight or don't go on this flight if the weather's not good or if you're not feeling so good or whatever. But in real life, that's not always practical. So sometimes there needs to be a little bit more to it than that. And so I would suggest that we, you know, just plan for alternates. And like in the example of a flight, not just an alternate airport, but think about some of the other things that would, you know, be entailed if you did have to go to that other airport. You know, what are the passengers going to do? Where are they going to get transportation or housing or food? The reason I put this in here is because when the pilot, especially in a small flight program, maybe a Cessna 206, you've got a pilot and 4 or 5 passengers, and he's thinking about, okay, I need to divert over here, but man, there's no place for the passengers to eat. And, you know, maybe I'll just try a little harder to get through the original destination. You know, don't let him have to worry about that. Plan ahead so that there's already, make that decision just based on the safety of that situation. Same thing in maintenance. You know, don't put yourself or the mechanic under so much pressure thinking, okay, the plane's got to be done by Friday, it's flying on Monday or whatever. You know, when he started working on Monday, say, okay, if, you know, we run into snags or whatever, let me know and we'll work on some other things. And then, you know, it's brought up, well, we need to order a cylinder and got to change a cylinder because the exhaust valve is burning, like, you know, Mike Bush was talking about. Okay, all right, well, let's, how long do you think it'll take, you know, and let's go ahead and start and plan early for an alternative so that he's not trying to work late into the night and making other mistakes, trying to push himself further and more than he should actually. So schedule extra time. That's a big one. You know, I mean, realistically, both in the flight schedule, the maintenance schedule, if you think, remember that whole thing about hope and optimism. If you think you can do this job in 5 days, give yourself 7. I've seen the airlines do this just in the last few years. I fly with Delta a lot, and these same flights that they used to schedule for departure time and your arrival time. Why did they do that? You know, they're not flying slower. They're just realizing, well, you know, part of the reason we don't have such a good on-time performance thing is our expectations were too high. It didn't have enough wiggle room built in for the unexpected, you know, late pushback or ATC, you know, having us hold somewhere or routing us around or for traffic or, you know, weather, that kind of thing. So put some extra time in there, whether when you're planning your flight schedule and maintenance, things like that. You know, and I've told people often when I was doing maintenance training, I said, oh, over deliver, under promise and over deliver. Don't over promise and under deliver. And so if you think you can get this job done in 5 days, tell them 7 days. And when you finish it in 5.5, you're a hero. If you had told them 5 days and you finish it in 5.5, everybody's mad at you. So, you know, give yourself extra time and then deliver the aircraft early and they'll be happy with you. And recognize the bigger picture. You know, what will it matter a week from now or a year from now? You know, is it the end of the world if this flight doesn't get completed or this maintenance task or whatever it happens to be, this training flight, you know, is it really worth taking all of these risks just to accomplish that right now? Or is this something that, you know, in the bigger picture, it's okay if it gets put off a little bit more? And then realize that success is safely getting the job done, even if it is on a different schedule or plan than the original. And realize safely getting the job done. You still get the job done, but you do it in a safe way. And that might require a different schedule or plan in order to accomplish that. And it's as Steve said in the video, you know, at the end of the day, if you have an accident, you know, your whole life's work can go up in an instant, go up in smoke, you know, and that missionary or church worker that you're carrying in the aircraft as a passenger, that whole ministry might come to a screeching halt if that person dies in a plane crash. And so there's some really severe consequences here. So go ahead and rehearse that plan B. You know, hopefully most of you before takeoff, many of you are being taught to do this, and I hope you're practicing on a regular basis. Rehearse your engine failure emergency procedures or whatever, you know, on takeoff, the engine quits, you know, you're gonna set up best flight or whatever. And I hope you're actually saying that out loud, even if it's a single pilot program. And what that does is it helps make that clear in your mind, brings it up to the forefront of your consciousness and does that. But you can do the same thing here, even on a practical level with what we're talking about, the plan B. You know, discuss with the passengers before departure. Hey, if we run into something, weather or whatever, unexpected, you know, the airstrip is washed out or whatever, where else could we go that would be acceptable to you? You know, make sure you have an idea of what would be an excellent plan B so that they're also thinking along those lines. And before the pressure's on. So, you know, with the scheduler before starting the maintenance or with the instructor or student before the flight, you know, what if things don't work out today? What can we plan on? And what is our plan B? So that we're on the same page and it makes the decision easy to divert to plan B or whatever. And be the safe pilot or mechanic who always, sometimes eventually, gets it done without endangering anyone, not the one who always gets it done or always gets us there despite the weather obstacles. Because that second pilot who always gets it done, I knew two of those guys, and neither of them is with us anymore. And they took pride in that, being the one that could always go when the weather wasn't so good. And when other people were turning back, they would go on through. And yeah, eventually that caught up with them. Remember that what we call tempting fate is actually what Christ called putting God to the test, which is sin, and he refused to do it. Many of you, you know, recall when Jesus was being tempted by the devil, Satan took him up onto the pinnacle of the temple and said, go ahead and jump off. And, you know, because scripture says the angels will bear you up and you won't even dash your foot against a stone. And Christ rebuked Satan and said, no, it's not right to put God to the test. And so we don't need to be doing the same thing. We don't need to be continuing on when the weather is bad or thinking, okay, yeah, I think I can make it here. Trying to land at an airstrip that's too narrow and, you know, you're just barely squeezing between trees or, you know, pushing yourself late into the night, working by yourself on an aircraft or whatever it is, pulling an all-nighter and then trying to go out and do a check ride if you're a student. Any of those things, just not a good idea. Remember Balaam's story. Recognize that God often uses obstacles to guide us. Balaam, some of you remember back in Numbers, was a prophet, and one of the local kings wanted him to come and put a curse on the children of Israel coming into his territory. And so he was on this donkey going to do that, and all of a sudden the donkey stopped in the middle of the road and kept trying to turn off and, crushed his foot against the wall, and he kept beating it and trying to make it go on. And finally the donkey talked to him and said, Balaam, stop it. But you can't, I've been very faithful to you and carried you all this time, and I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't dangerous for you to keep going. And then God opened Balaam's eyes, and there was an angel there with a sword that was going to kill him if he had continued on. And I often wonder sometimes if our airplanes could talk, if they'd be like Balaam's donkey and saying, look, you really, really don't, trust me, you don't want to land there with the wind like that. Trust me, you don't want to penetrate that thunderstorm. Trust me, you don't want to do this. Why are you insisting on pressing on? But just back off and realize that, we need to switch to a different plan. Here's a phrase, or really a statement about safety, that when we held a safety summit back in 2005, we had about 30 different mission organizations participating in that. And we talked about the philosophy of safety. And this is a statement that was crafted during that time. Actually took quite a bit of time and effort to do, but I think it's quite good for us to think about as we look at ourselves. Where are we, our own philosophy of safety? And it says, whereas God is sovereign, in other words, that he is in charge of all things, and he has ordered this world under natural and human laws, we affirm the need to implement common standards that allow us to safely serve with accountability as good stewards of the aviation ministries God has entrusted to us. And there's a lot in there. But the idea that God has ordered this world under natural and human laws, when we violate a law, there's consequences. And we can tell ourselves that we won't get caught, or it won't happen to us, or we're exempted because we're a good guy, or we're doing the right thing, or whatever. And it's just not true. And we need to affirm the need to go ahead and follow these common standards that allow us to safely serve with accountability. Again, accountability is something we as human beings need. It's not just good, it's something we need to keep us on our toes, to keep us on the right track. As good stewards of the aviation ministries God has entrusted to us. And again, when we don't own the aircraft, we don't own any of the resources that we've been entrusted to. We're stewards. God has put them in our hands and entrusted them to us. And that includes the lives of our passengers and others that we're serving. And it's a very serious charge that we have. And we need to carry that out with a great deal of humility and a sense of responsibility. Here's a few sayings just to illustrate some of what we're talking about. There's a lot of truth in old wives' tales. As I said, humans are humans. A pilot who dies in the rain or in the storm is buried in the sunshine. What's that talking about? Talking about that, probably the weather's horrendous today, but just wait till tomorrow will be beautiful. There are old pilots and bold pilots, but there are no old, bold pilots. And again, if you're a bold pilot and you're out there taking a lot of risks, chances are you won't live to be old. Tomorrow's another day. Okay, that's another one. Goes right along with our hope and optimism, but it also has a lot of truth into it. It's time to call it quits. Go home, get some rest, and then tackle this tomorrow when we're fresh. What will I tell the insurance company or the boss or my wife? This one of the pilots giving me a check out in East Africa as we're flying up on Lake Victoria, which is 200 miles across, freshwater lake, nice and warm. And I'm like, we can fly outside a glide distance of the shore here. If we had to ditch it, we would just, float and people would come and rescue us. It wouldn't be a big deal. And he says, yeah, but what are you going to tell the insurance company that the wreckage wasn't recoverable because it sank into 200 feet of water? Not to mention that we're violating the, FARs. So And that really stuck with me, or so just think about it, and this a lot has to do with that accountability side. People have said to me, I've often thought about, how am I going to explain this if I take this risk and it doesn't work out? Several people have mentioned to me that they have determined in their hearts not to be the feature of the next MSI safety or some mishap summary. They don't want to be the next star feature, and that keeps them out of the weeds. So I appreciate that. And I think that's a good thing. And then we have alluded to this one already, but will it matter 1 week or 1 year or 1 decade from now? Is it really worth pushing this one, or can it rest till tomorrow? A good example of that with, where knowledge is power. I can remember a person, I was at an airport one day and the regularly scheduled airline flight didn't show up that day. And there was a passenger there who was scheduled to connect to an international flight, and he was just frantic, and so he chartered me to fly him, 2.5 hours away to catch his international flight because it was a non-refundable ticket. And I said, well, you can probably go tomorrow, you can drive and get to tomorrow. No, it's non-refundable. And he just insisted. So I did. I went ahead and flew him there. But, talking to the airline, all that means is they don't give a cash refund. That doesn't mean they're not going to put you on tomorrow's flight if you miss the flight today. And most airlines are that way. They're going to get you on tomorrow's flight. They're not going to give you a cash refund for missing your flight. But, it's not the end of the world often, especially if in this case, it was the national airline that canceled the connecting flight. And then the old one that's probably been a little bit worn out, unfortunately, is what would Jesus do? I think that's a very good question often, just to stop and reflect on that once in a while. So any questions or discussion? I don't know that there's any way to now. Let's see, maybe Jason or Glenn can come on and help with that. Thank you very much. There's my contact information, and look forward to speaking to many of you in the not too distant future. God bless you all.
Hey, thanks, John. It's always good hearing from you, John. So we really appreciate that. Don't know if I don't see any questions have come up.
Okay, you can type in the chat box in the Q&A.
Yep, I see the chat box, but I don't see any questions over there.
Okay.
So, okay.